Okay, so today I'm going to speak about Moses and Joshua. But to set the scene, I'm going to roll back a few years. So when I first left university, I did an internship at this company. And when I was at this company, there was me and I think there was 25 other interns. And we all had a few objectives. One of the objectives was to have, you've got to schedule 4 meetings with people that are quite senior in the business and just ask them career questions. How do you maintain your ambition? How do you get to this level? What do you do in these sort of situations? So, I put these meetings in, I learned loads, ended up putting more and more. Then when I finished the internship, went to my next company, I did the same thing. And at the current business I'm at now, I rinse and repeat. I just email random people, ask them if they're up for a half an hour chat, and then I talk to them. And I spoke to somebody 2 weeks ago, and she was a really interesting person, and she was telling me, like, when you want to make a point to somebody, when you want to try and drive something home, you need to land the plane. And with different people, you're going to land the plane differently. So, for example, if I speak to my dad, I won't be like nice and fluffy. I'll just land the plane straight away, as if I was like a fighter jet landing on an aircraft carrier. I'll put the brakes on and slam on the brakes. I wouldn't be nice about it, right? But if I was speaking to somebody I hadn't known before, if I was talking to them about something very technical, I would land the plane like a commercial Boeing 747. If it's got 400 people in it, I don't want to slam the brakes. Everyone's going to get upset. So I would land the plane nice and smoothly. So she was telling me, when you want to drive your point home, try and read the room and land the plane according to the audience. So choose the angle you want to come in at, choose the plane that you want to be, so you can drive the point home. Now, today what I'm going to talk about is Moses and Joshua. And the reason I bring the point about landing the plane is that they both do very similar things. So they both send spies to the promised land. They both cross a river or a sea. They both have battles in the Bible, many other things as well. But they all do these 3 things and the other things very differently. So they both have their planes to land, but they land their planes very differently. And the first thing I want to look at is how Moses and Joshua, they crossed the River Jordan. So Joshua crossed the River Jordan, Moses splits the Red Sea. The first thing to note is that Moses splits the Red Sea, and he does it at night. So at this point in Exodus, there is the cloud that moves from the front to lead the Israelites to the back, creates a barrier between the Israelites and the Egyptians so that the Israelites can cross the Red Sea. This happens at night, and then there's a wall of fire to light the way during the nights. With Joshua, he tells the Israelites, wake up at dawn, be ready in the morning, and they cross the River Jordan during the day. And the point here is that there is never a bad time for God to split the sea. He can do it at night, he can do it during the day. If you think the problem's too big, you don't know how big your God is. If you think you're too late, you don't know how quick your God is. There is never a bad time to call on God for help. And sometimes the best prayers that you can have are those short prayers, the prayers where you say the one word, which is help. So I want to go to Exodus 14:13, and we're going to run through a few scriptures here. So Exodus 14:13, and it says, And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm. See the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians who you see today, you shall never see again. Now there's a few words here. So firstly, it starts off by saying, fear not. So at this point in time, the Israelites were fearful, and I'll get to this in a bit more detail. It then tells them Moses then says, I want you to stand firm. When we read this in our English Bibles, the words stand and firm are 2 different words. But in Hebrew, stand firm is 1 word, meaning that there's no other way that you can stand. You can't stand 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You can't stand half-heartedly. When you stand, you have to be all in. So the people, when Moses is telling the people, he says, be all in on the word of God. Like, stand on what God has promised you. Stand knowing that we will go out of Egypt, we will cross the Red Sea and go into the promised land. A few years ago, I met a confidence coach at a barbecue, and I asked her, what are some tips you give to people for being more confident? And she said, when you stand, plant your feet in the ground, stand firm. And when you sit, the first thing is, plant your feet in the ground, again, to stand firm. Now, something else which is quite interesting in this verse, it says, for the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. Now, the first time the word never is used in the Bible is used with Noah, when God says, I will never again flood the earth. And that never was backed up by a covenant. So every time you see the word never, it's a big deal. It's a covenant-backed never. And when Richard preaches, he says all means all in Greek, and all does mean all. But when you read never in Hebrew, never is covenant-backed never. It's like a never times 3,000. Okay. The next verse says, so verse 14 says, the Lord will fight for you, and you only have to be silent. So at this point, the Israelites, they are complaining to God. They're complaining to Moses. They say, did you bring us out here to the wilderness to die? Is this as far as we're going to go? If we bring us to die here, we might as well go back and be slaves. So Moses says to them, you only have to be silent. So in order for God to work, what do you have to do? You have to be silent. Now, at home, we have a picture frame with Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And this says, there's a time for this, there's a time for that. There's a time to work, there's a time to rest, there's a time to start, a time to finish. There's a time to laugh, there's a time to cry. And at the same time, there's a time to shout, and there's a time to be silent. When the Israelites shouted with Joshua, the walls of Jericho came down. But when they were silent, the Red Sea split. There's a time for everything. And it's important to know what time it is to shout, what time it is to remain silent, the time when you need to go to work, and the time when you need to let God go to work on your behalf. Now, verse 15 says, the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. I like this verse because it says, like, why do you cry to me? Meaning that Moses told everybody be silent, and then he himself cried to God. So as a leader, you want to try and follow your own instruction. So if you told the people to be silent, probably best for yourself also to be silent. And God's instruction to him was to go forward, was to take one step forward. Meaning that at this point in time, the Israelites were standing still. So in verse 13, it says, fear not. And then in verse 15, it says to go forward. Which means that fear comes when you're standing still. Fear comes when you're not doing anything. And there's a scripture in Matthew, I don't have it on me, but it talks about when you cast out a demon or cast out a devil, the house is empty. But if you do not fill out that house, they will come back 7 times worse. Point here is that when you get rid of something, let's say if all you do is like spend your time watching TV, if you stop watching TV, like that's good, you're stopping going backwards. But now if you're idle, you just sit on the sofa, do nothing, then that's you standing still. But in order to stop you standing still, stop you being in fear, you need to move forward, to try and take that first step forward. And I heard this story about this young girl. So she learned how to swim when she was 6 years old, and then at 8 years old, she entered her first swimming competition. And in the competition, all the girls, they lined up ready to jump in the pool. And just before they blew the whistle for her to get in the pool, she quickly ran to her mum. Was like, Mum, I just can't do this. I can't do this, Mum. I've only been swimming 2 years. All these other girls, they've been swimming for like 3 years, Mum. I can't do it. And Mum says to her, you can do it. Just get back on the line and get in the water. And she says, no, Mum, I can't win this race. I just can't win the race. And her mum says to her, today, it's not about winning the race. Today's not about coming second. It's not about coming third. Today's not about finishing the race. Today is not about doing one length of the pool. Today's victory is getting in the water. The point here is that when you take your first step forward, when God says to go forward, he's not saying go from A to Z. He's just saying get in the water. Just take that first step forward and watch what I'll do. My God is for me and he goes before me. All you have to do is to get in the water. Then verse 16 says, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. So here it says, lift up your staff. It doesn't say lift up your rod, it says lift up your staff. And Psalms 23 tells us that your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So you need both the two things. Now the rod in the Bible, it represents discipline, but the staff represents guidance. So a staff is like a wooden stick with a hook at the end. So if your sheep is in a ditch, you hook it around the sheep and you sort of yank it out. So you need both the staff as well as the rod in order to live a comfortable life. But in addition to that, you also need to understand that God is the shepherd and that you are the sheep. Yeah. So we have to do what sheep need to do, which is just to to be like sheep, just to move around, just to take action. Go left, go right, go forwards, go backwards. Be like sheep. So when God says to Moses, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand, he's saying, lift up your staff, lift up your guidance. Now I want you to be a leader for Israel. Before you were negotiating with Pharaoh, now I want you to lead the people. So lift up your staff means, Moses, I now want you to lead. Okay, and if we're gonna flip to Joshua now. So Joshua 1:10, in the first chapter of Joshua, which is pretty cool. So it starts off with the first chapter of Joshua is split into different sections. So the first part, God says to Joshua, all right, Moses is now dead. Then he goes on to giving Joshua this massive pep talk. He says to him, all right, be strong and full of courage. Be strong and very courageous. And then two verses later, again, he says, be strong and very courageous. So after Joshua has had his pep talk from God, this is his first instruction to the people of Israel. He tells them, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people. So he's talking to his commanders or the generals. Prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go and take possession of the land your God is giving you to possess. There's a few things here. The first thing is that he says, prepare your provisions. Now, the word for provisions in Hebrew, it means food. But it doesn't just mean food. It means prepare your dry food, prepare your imperishable food. So when Jacob made a meal for Esau, he made him a stew. This in Hebrew is not dry food. This is wet food. It means like a proper meal that you can eat now. So if you go to the restaurant, you will get a meal that you can readily eat. But what Joshua is saying, prepare your imperishable food, prepare your dried food. And the Hebrew word for this is teseda, so T-S-E-D-A-H. And the explanation of the word does not just stop at prepare your dried food. It says, prepare your dried food. This is only prepared by somebody of wisdom, somebody that has the foresight to see that the onward journey could be difficult. Then the verse goes on to say, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan. Again, passing over the river Jordan. Right, this river is not like crossing the river Thames where it takes 5-10 minutes. This is a 2-mile wide river. So I want you to pass over a 2-mile wide river and to take possession. Now in English we read to take possession as possession is one word. But in Hebrew it's dispossess whoever is currently possessing so you can now possess. So when Joshua says, I want you to take possession, he's saying, I want you to kill who is currently there so you can now be the king of the city. So when you read this, be strong, courageous, be very strong, courageous, be strong, courageous, the first thing that Joshua says is to everybody, the onward journey is going to be tough. Prepare for the onward journey, both in your hearts, in your mind, and prepare your physical food. Because we are going to cross the river Jordan. We're going to do the impossible. But once we've done the impossible, we are going to then dispossess people who currently possess our inheritance. When it says to take possession of the land your God is giving you, the word giving here is not just like giving you £5, giving you something for free. The Hebrews see this as their divine inheritance. So it's not a gift, it's their birthright. So I want you to dispossess people from your birthright and take it back. In order to say those three things, to prepare for the journey is going to be difficult. To cross the river Jordan and to dispossess people, it takes what? It takes strength and it takes courage to say that, which is why the previous verses is drilled into Joshua. Strength, courage, strength, courage, strength, and courage. Now, when we talk about dry food, these are the verses which are imprinted on the inside of your heart. So, if when you come to church right now, you have people, whenever they speak, they prepare something for you. It's like preparing a meal. When you have an hour, half an hour at home, or however long it is, you read the Bible, you study different verses, study what each, the different words mean, different places, all that kind of stuff. You're preparing yourself your own meal. But there's going to be times within the week, times in the office when you don't have the time to whip out a Bible, time to go through all these different verses. And in those times is when you need to have your dried food ready. You need to have those verses which are imprinted on the inside of your heart, ready to go. When I was a bit unwell towards the end of last year, and a verse that always stuck with me was from Joshua 14, and it was Caleb saying, I'm as strong this day as the day that Moses sent me. for war, both for going out and for coming in. And the reason why I like that verse is because it doesn't stop at, I'm going to be well. It takes it one step further to, I'm going to go out for war. Remember, it's one thing to stop going backwards, it's another thing to stand still, but it's a third thing to then move forward. And moving forward takes those small steps. Don't stand still, keep moving forward. Now, I heard a story, this is told by, I think it was Terry Savelle a while back, and she mentioned that there was once an English sailor. He was in Japan. He was walking up and down the harbor in Japan, and when he was walking back to his accommodation, he saw this tattoo parlor. And at the tattoo parlor, he put all the different pictures of all the tattoos he's done before. And one of them said, "Born to lose." So he goes inside the shop, and he meets the Japanese tattoo parlor, and he's so intrigued, and he says to him, "People actually get this tattooed on themselves." And in broken English, the Japanese man says to him, before tattooed on skin, first tattooed on mind. So before you see the promises of God, you first have to have them in your heart. You first have them ingrained in your heart, ingrained in your mind. Have your dried food ready to go. Now, the time that they crossed the River Jordan was an important time. They crossed it during harvest time. Now, harvest time for the River Jordan around that area lasts about 3 months. And in these 3 months, something happens, which is the River Jordan bursts its banks. So this is the widest point of the year in order for them to cross the River Jordan. But God says to them, it doesn't matter how wide it is, doesn't matter how crap your timing is, how bad your timing is, how late you left your exam, I will be there for you. Your study, progress, if you prepared the night before, God will be there for you. Well, whatever it is, God is going to be there. But God also says to Joshua, I will exalt you and make you great in front of all these people. And what he did was, like I mentioned, he split the River Jordan. It was 2 miles in width. But where the river stopped flowing was a place called Adam, which was 20 miles to the east. Which means that when God split the River Jordan, he didn't just make a nice little passageway for them to cross the river. He made 40 miles squared worth of dry ground. When he did that, he was saying to all of the Israelites, Joshua is the new leader. I will make him great in front of all of you. I didn't just make a little passageway. I made 40 miles squared worth of dry ground. There is no barrier too big for God. I heard a story, and I think Ben told this 2 years ago at the men's conference. It was to do with Jerry Savelle. And after one sermon, he said to this individual, he said, by the end of the week, you're going to be debt-free. And the guy was obviously in a lot of debt, but he didn't know how it was going to happen. Anyways, on Monday morning, he goes to the ATM to withdraw some cash. Puts his card in, puts his PIN in, but his account is locked. So he gets on the phone, calls his bank. I was like, hey guys, what's going on? I know I've got money in my bank account. I know I've got debt as well, but how come I can't access my cash? And the bank said to him, sorry, there's been a mistake. Somebody sent you millions of pounds in error. So what we're doing is we're reversing the money from your account back to the original sender. Your account will be back live within 2 to 3 days. So 2 to 3 days, he logs on, he sees his bank account, he sees millions of pounds went in, millions of pounds went out. Still in debt, still not much money in his bank account. And then on the Friday that week, he gets a random call. And the other person on the other side of the call says, hi, my name is so-and-so. I accidentally sent you millions of pounds, and fortunately enough for me, it was reversed back. But the bank told me that because of my mistake, you couldn't access your account for 2 to 3 days. Like, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. I hope you could still, pay for petrol, pay for your rent, buy your food for your kids. If there's any way I could pay you back, I'd like to pay off all your debts for you. And that's how the man's debts was paid off. It wasn't a way that he saw coming. He saw the millions of pounds come in, saw it flash straight away, but then on the Friday, he got the call that said, give me the number and I'm ready to pay your debts. The point of the story is, number one, you never know how God is going to do things. You don't know the miracles he's going to do. But number two, you need to be ready for God to do these miracles. And this man knew the exact amount of debt he had, right? It's not to say that you want to focus on your debt, but you want to know the goal that you're achieving. So if you want to run a marathon, know the time that you want to get. Be specific about these things. And this is something else I learned from Ben, is that when the priests, when they split the River Jordan, how it happened was the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant. So they went into the water, they held the Ark of the Covenant, which is made out of wood, and it's got a stone inside. So this is not something that's light. So they're carrying this big box, and the priests are going into the water. Their feet get wet. Most likely their clothes get wet. So they're standing there, they've got cold feet, their clothes are wet. It's uncomfortable to be where they're standing. And they stand there until 20 miles away, the water stops flowing. So we can rest assured that they stood there for a long time. Right? They were uncomfortable for a long time, but yet they had the faith to persevere. And when they stood there, then the water started to dry up. Now I say this because when you go after the dreams that God has put in your heart, it will be uncomfortable when you first start. If you start going to the gym, the first time you go, you will be sore afterwards. But if you stop going, then you will never see the result. When you start a new job, I don't care who you are, everyone feels like a fraud when they first start their new job. But you only become an expert after you go through those months of just getting to learn to learn the role. So when you have your dream, put your feet in the water, understand that it's going to be uncomfortable, but do not give up. Be like the priest, stand there until you see the miracle happen. Not giving up is key. Now, the final thing to learn about how they crossed the river is that when Moses crossed the river, the Israelites, they walked across the river. But when Joshua crossed the river Jordan, the Israelites, they walked hurriedly. They walked with pace, they walked with intensity, they walked with purpose. So we need to understand why the two were different. So the first time when they crossed the Red Sea, they were being pushed by the Israelites. They were pushed to do something. But the second time, they're pushed by the Egyptians. But the second time, they were being pulled into the promised land. They were being pulled into the goodness of God. When you are pushed to do something, you will do it. But when you are pulled to do something, you will do it with intensity, with purpose. Find the things that pull you to do things. Find the dreams in your heart, those desires that you have in your heart, and you will be pulled to do it. You will walk there with haste. You will drop everything and go and do it. These things are the things that God wants us to spend our time with. And when we spend our time doing these things, it feels like play. It doesn't feel like work. And we can just do it with an intensity that we cannot do anything else with. Okay, so number 2 is sending spies. So we've done the first one, crossing the sea, crossing the river. Now we're on to sending spies. So what I'm going to look at here is how they sent the spies. So when Moses sent the spies, he sent 12 spies, and these were the leaders of the tribes. So we had Joshua, had Caleb, and all the other leaders. So when the spies went out, everybody knew, right, our leaders are gone because they've gone into the promised land to spy out the land. They all left, they went to spy out the land. But when Joshua sent the spies, it says that he sent them in secret, meaning that nobody knew when the spies went out. Nobody knows who the spies were. It was not recorded in the Bible who they were. And the word in secret in Hebrew, it means to be deaf to. It means to be deaf to the people around you, but at the same time means to be not to speak so other people cannot hear you. And the point here is that there are some things that you need to do in silence. There's some things that need to be done in secret. And the reason being is because many of these things, they don't make sense to other people. There's no logic, there's no rhyme or rhythm. When God says to you, like, give a certain amount or spend your time doing this, it won't make sense to other people. And the easiest way to not do it is to tell other people about it and let them put you off. So the key to this is to do it in secret. Be deaf to the people around you and make sure that they are also deaf to you by not saying anything. There's no logic to the things that God put in your heart. If Joshua had spoken to Caleb and said, hey, Caleb, I'm going to send 2 spies, he could have said, Josh, why send 2 when you can send 3? Maybe if he's spoken to somebody else, they would have said, Moses sent 12, why don't you send 12? He came back with 2 good, why don't you maybe send 24? Then you get 4 good reports. But Joshua chose to do it in silence. It didn't make sense to him, but he did it anyway. And the interesting thing about this is when Joshua sent 2 spies, the word for 2 in Hebrew means to do again, means to repeat. The first time 2 came back with a positive reply, so what did Joshua do? He did it again. He just repeated the success. Don't worry about the other 10, just focus on the 2, and the 2 is who he sent. Things may not make sense to other people, but they will make sense to God and make sense to us. Now, a story I have about this is to do with the Rolling Stones. When it comes to music, I've got no idea, by the way. I don't know if they are famous. They're not famous. I'm guessing they are because there's a story about them. Don't know if they're UK band, American, Australian. But anyways, how the story goes is They were on tour in Scotland. So they took a plane, landed nice and gently in Edinburgh. They got off the plane and they took a train to Glasgow. When they got off the train, they then took a bus. But they found out that the bus was going the wrong way. So they had to get off the bus and then walk to the place of their gig, pretty much. But on the way there, they decided, we need to take another bus, otherwise we're going to be late. And at this point in time, it was raining. They've got the guitar one hand, amplifier in the other hand. They got their backpacks, all their luggage with them. They're just absolutely soaked in rain. They're waiting at a bus stop because they got on the wrong bus, and they're trying to get to where their performance is. And by the bus stop, there's a small house. And in this house, there is a lovely family, a mum, a dad, a young boy, a young girl. They've got a lovely roast dinner on the inside, gravy. They've got the fire on. It's so cozy in the house, but these guys are standing outside in the pouring rain. And they're all just standing in the line. They're looking at the house. And one of them looks at the rest and says, how do people live like that? Meaning that the band could not understand how people lived like a life of routine, a life of comfort. What made sense to them was missing buses, missing trains, making it just on time, carrying their luggage, being soaked in the rain. That's what a true life meant to them. And for you, that might be the same thing. It might not make sense to any other people, but if it makes sense to you, then you have to live that way. It could be that you enjoy going to mission trips. You enjoy going to the countries where nobody wants to go to in the world, but that is where your passion lies. If that makes sense to you, then go for it. Just do it if it makes sense to you. Now, a few things I want to look at when it comes to sending the spies is, Adam, if you could put my picture up, actually, that'll be super helpful. Okay, cool. So I made a little table here, and I'll run you through the table. So Moses, we've got three columns, so Moses and Joshua. So who were the spies and where were they sent from? So Moses goes, all right, you know what? One from each tribe, let's just be fair, throw them in, let's do it. Now, God told him to do it. It wasn't that Moses was a politician, he chose to be fancy diplomatic. God told him, send one person from each tribe. Joshua, he sent people from a tribe, 2 people, and they were a place called Shittim, which is not linked to a tribe. So Joshua completely disregarded the fact that you need one person from each tribe. He said, listen, 2 people worked before, I'm just going to send 2. I don't care what tribe they're from. But he cared the place that they were from. And this place is a place in the desert. And specifically in this place in the desert, there is something called acacia trees. Now, acacia trees produce something called acacia wood. And this wood is important because it is used to build the Ark of the Covenant as well as to build the tabernacle. But the question is, why do people use this wood? Why don't they use oak? Why don't they use willow or whatever? I don't know any more trees than that. But why don't they use another type of wood? And the reason being is that acacia wood has 2 properties that make it very attractive. Number 1, it's extremely strong. And number 2, it's extremely light. Meaning that when they were wandering around in the wilderness, they had to put their tent down, build the tabernacle, put it away, move somewhere else, reconstruct the tabernacle. So they needed something that was strong in order to do the job, but light in order that they could move around. So that's what acacia wood is. That's the properties of it. Now, acacia trees are found in the desert, and the reason why they can survive in the desert is because of 2 things. Number 1 is because they got roots that go extremely deep into the ground, so deep that they can get water that other trees cannot get. And number 2 is that their roots go wide, so they're both deep and wide. And the picture of acacia trees is the picture of the spies that went out, meaning that they had roots in the word of God that went deep as well as went wide. It did not matter what tribe they were from, it mattered how deep their roots were. And because of that, they knew that these 2 people would come back with a good report, because they saw in their heart what God saw in them. Now with Moses, he sent, I think it was 6 or 7 instructions he gave to the Israelites. He said, all right, I want you to check out the land. All right, tell me if it's fortified, not fortified, if the army is trained, if it's not trained. They got strongholds, they don't have strongholds. Look and analyze the land and tell me exactly from a military perspective what you see. I want a full report. Give me these, and he gave them all these different things to look at. With Joshua, he said to them to do one thing. He said to them, I want you to see. And the word to see here means to see with your physical eyes as well as to see with the eyes of your heart. So Moses focused on the things of the physical. He focused on the military aspects. He focused on the height, the depth, the breadth. But Joshua focused on the eyes of the heart. When you look at your problem, do not overanalyze it. Do not look at your mountain and say, okay, it's going to take this much money, this much time, this, that, and the third. Look at it with the eyes of your heart. See it on the inside of you. Just focus on that one thing. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, and Adam, I didn't give you this, so I don't need to put it up, but it's 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 12. And this is King Jehoshaphat. He's surrounded by 3 enemy kings. And he says, I do not know what to do, but my eyes are on you. One of the best prayers in the Bible. I don't know what's going on, God, but my eyes are on you. I don't know how I'm going to achieve my goal, God, but my eyes are on you. Don't focus on the natural things. Focus on that thing in your heart. See it on the inside of you. Now, time in the promised land. I like this because 40 days, 40 nights. That's how long it took them to fail spying the promised land. 40 days, 40 nights. But with Joshua, they were there for 1 day. They didn't even stay 1 night. They were there 1 day. So it's not the quantity, but it is the quality. And when I think about this, I always bring it back to when you read the Bible. I know people that have read it cover to cover many times, but they don't quite understand what's going on in the Bible. They don't quite grasp the scriptures. But I've got some friends, they just know a handful of verses, but you see their life and it's like a stock that you would invest in, just going straight up. You don't need to know every verse in the Bible. You don't need to be able to quote how many chapters are on the Old Testament, the New Testament, but have the quality of the Word of God. Have the revelation of these scriptures. Find some scriptures that really mean something to you. Engrave them in your heart. Make them your dried food, so when you are in those tough times, you can call upon them. Wise people do this because they know that the onward journey is not going to be easy. So have your dried food ready. Have these scriptures ready. The quality of the revelation, not the quantity of your output. There's a book that says, do not read to complete, but read to understand. And when you read the Bible, don't read to complete, but read to connect. Connect with the Word of God. Connect to your heavenly manufacturer. We also want to look at what the spies did. So with Moses, the spies, they just looked. They saw the land, they saw the grapes, they saw the people that were there, they saw that they were big, they were giants. Maybe we can't take them. But with Joshua, they spoke. They spoke to Rahab. Now, Rahab, as we know in the Bible, Rahab is a prostitute. But they still spoke to her. And she told them, the people here, they are trembling. We heard about what your God did. You defeated 2 kings. You crossed the Red Sea. We remember these things. Do you remember them? And it's so important that we remember the miracles that God has done for us. In the past, all the times he's been there for us, he's dug us out of these holes, helped us pass exams, driving tests, get the new job. Remember the things that God has done for you. Oftentimes, people remember the things that God has done for you, but the question is, do you remember those things yourself? You need to remember the things. When you see your mountain, do not just look at it, but you want to speak to it. Oftentimes, when you speak to your mountain, you realize it is not as big a mountain as you first thought. When you start to take action towards your goal, you realize it's not that hard a goal as you first imagined. There was a book, I can't remember what book it is, but at the top of a hill was fear. It's this thing called fear at the top of the hill. And everybody was at the bottom, all the kids were at the bottom, and they never went to the top. But one day, there was a kid that decided, I'm going to march up the hill. And when he started walking up the hill, he realized that fear at the top got smaller and smaller. And when he got to the top of the hill, he realized he was 100 times the size of that little fear. Point being is that when you take steps towards your goal, when you speak to the obstacle in front of you, you realize how small it is. Don't just look at the obstacle, speak to your mountain, because we have a mountain-moving God. Now, the final thing here is I want to look at the direction of entry. So, with Moses, when the spies went to the promised land, they went from south to north. Going from south to north means that they start in the wilderness, which is a very flat area, and they end up north, which is hilly, because the promised land has lots of hills, lots of mountains. So when they looked at their problem, these giants were giants, but they looked like giants times 10. They looked huge. But when Joshua went to the promised land, they went from east to west. Now, going back to Moses, their giants looked huge to them, which meant that they needed to change their perspective. You need to change your perspective when you look at your obstacles to see yourself how God sees you. See yourself as See yourself as 7 foot. See yourself as a giant, because that's who you have on the inside of you. You have a giant killing God on the inside of you. But with Joshua, they went east to west. And the interesting thing is that they crossed the river Jordan in order to get to Jericho. Meaning that to cross the river Jordan, they had to split the river and attack Jericho. Once they crossed the river, they didn't just have like a magic lever they could pull and they could go back the other side. When they crossed the river, they had no choice but to go forward. If they did not conquer Jericho, Jericho would have pushed them back to the river and killed them at the river, meaning they only had one option. But with Moses, if they went into the promised land, they knew that if they couldn't do it, they could just turn around and back out. There's going to be certain times when you have to have the Joshua attitude or the burn the boats attitude to do or die. When you know there's no other option, but the only option is to go forward, the only option is to conquer, the only option is to believe that God is going to be there for you. With Moses, there was always like a backup. There was always an escape route. I will tell a quick story about this young boy. And this young boy, when he was first born, he had an infection on his left arm. So unfortunately, the doctor said to his parents, we need to amputate his left arm. So when he was born, he had his left arm amputated, and he grew up his life with one arm. When he was 10 years old, he started practicing judo. So his parents took him to the judo center. They met the sensei, and they said to the sensei, can you train my son? And the sensei looks at the son and goes, and he has a pause, and it felt like a lifetime. Then he says, I'll train him. 1 year later, the boy says to his dad, Dad, I've been doing judo for 1 year. I only know this one move. All the other kids, they know 5 moves, they know 6 moves. And his dad says to him, just continue and practice that one move that you know. Rinse and repeat, practice that one move. The next year comes by. The kid goes to his dad, Dad, I only know this one move. All the other kids, they know 5, they know 10 moves, they know 15 moves. But Dad, I only know this one move. His dad says to him, don't worry about the quantity, just focus on that one move that you know and make that the best move that you can do. The next year, he enters into a judo competition, and he's against able-bodied people. And it's the first round, he's standing there, he's a bit worried. And he says to his dad, Dad, I'm going to get absolutely destroyed in this match. I've only got one arm, firstly. And secondly, Dad, I've only got one move. They're just going to destroy me in the first round. And his dad says to him, just use your one move. So the match starts. Within 10 seconds, the boy with the one arm wins. Round 2, same again. 10 seconds, he wins. Quarterfinal, he wins. Semifinal, he wins. And now he's about to enter the final. And it's like, Dad, the guy in the final, he watched me in the first round, the second round, the third round, quarterfinal, semifinal. He knows I've only got one move, Dad. He's obviously going to defend against my one move, and I'm toast in this final. I might as well just not do it, Dad. And his dad was like, son, you've got one move. Just use your one move. So he gets in the final, 10 seconds. The boy with one arm wins. And they celebrate, all happy clappy, and they go back to the sensei and was like, Sensei, why did you only teach me one move? You taught everyone 10, 15 moves. Why did you only teach me one move? And he says to him, I only taught you one move because you only had one move you could make. With one arm, you only had one move you could make. Then he says, but if I only had one move, how come the people couldn't defend against my one move? And the sensei says, the only defense against that one move is to grab the left arm, but you have no left arm to grab. Now, the moral of the story is, the boy looked at everything he did not have. He looked at, I don't have 15 moves, I've only got one move. I've only got one arm, they've only got 2. But what he failed to realize was the things that he did have, his disadvantages turned out to be his greatest advantages. It's our differences that make us special. It's our differences that make us unique. What we fail to recognize is oftentimes our competitive advantage. Not having that one arm was his greatest strength, even though he did not realize it. Only practicing that one move for 2 years straight was his greatest quality because he could pull it off flawlessly within 10 seconds every match. What he failed to realize was what he was greatest at. Do not look at what you do not have. Instead of focus on the things you do have. Your greatest disadvantage is oftentimes found as what you think is your greatest disadvantage can oftentimes be your greatest advantage. And finally, be surrounded by the right people. He was surrounded by his dad. His dad taught him every time, focus on your one move. Focus on the things that you can control. Focus on the things that you can do. Don't worry about everything else. Just focus on that. And at the same time, he had the sensei that knew, right, this kid, he's only got one move. He's only got one choice. Let's just get him to do this. Maybe he'll feel left out. Maybe he can't do the other 10 moves. But I don't care about how he feels. I care about him winning. Joshua, when he was going to cross the River Jordan, when he crossed it, he was going to fight Jericho. He only had that one move. The only thing he could do was to go forward and kill everybody in that city. That's his only move that he could do. So that's the only move that he did. He did not look at the disadvantage. He didn't say, Jericho, they've got walls. We've never conquered these walls before. We don't have these catapults. He focused on what he had, which was God. He put his eyes on God, just like the spies did. The 2 spies, they did not focus on what the land was. They focused on the God that they saw inside of them. Now, the final thing I want to touch on is the first battle. So, Moses' first battle is against the Amalekites. And against the Amalekites in this battle, they were defending. And Joshua's first battle was against Jericho. He was attacking Jericho. So you can see the difference there. One is defending, one is attacking. Now, the first battle with Moses, in Exodus 17, verse 8, it says, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Now, the name of this place is significant. And in the next verse it says, Moses said to Joshua, come choose some of our men and go and fight the Amalekites. When you see the word Joshua here, this is the first time Joshua's name is mentioned in the Bible. And the previous verse it says, it took place at Rephidim. This place in the Bible, this word stems from the root word Raphad, which means refreshing or place of rest. So Joshua, the first time he is mentioned, he was mentioned at the Battle of Rephidim, otherwise known as the Battle of Rest. Joshua's whole ministry as the leader of Israel was a ministry of rest. Moses' whole ministry as the leader of Israel was a ministry of works. Moses from the tribe of Levi. Levi are known to be the priests. They're known to do good works, to tick all the boxes. Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim, the tribe of fruitfulness. He first is mentioned at the Battle of Rest. Anyways, verse 9 says, Moses said to Joshua, choose some of the men, go and fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. And verse 10 says, so Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill. So at the top of the hill, they're fighting this battle, and they would only win the battle as long as Moses held his arms up. But when his arms got tired, when he started to get the lactic acid build up or whatever you want, he needed the people around him to hold his arms up for him. And when they held up his arms, Joshua was able to win the battle. The lesson here is you need to have people like Aaron and Hur in your life, people to hold your arms up when you get tired, people to encourage you when you think you cannot do it. Have Aaron's and have Hers in your life, that they know the time to hold your arms up and they will do it without question. When it came to Joshua's method of victory, how did he do it? He did not fight. He walked around Jericho, walked for 7 days around Jericho, and then the wall came down. Joshua has an encounter with the commander of the army of the Lord. And he says to him, Joshua says to the commander of the army of the Lord, he says, are you for us or are you against us? And the commander of the army of the Lord says, neither. Meaning, Joshua, I'm not on your side, but at the same time, I'm not on Jericho's side. So what does this mean? When he says, Joshua, I'm not on your side, he's saying to Joshua, the battle is not yours, the battle is the Lord's. Leave this to me. All you have to do is walk. I will do the work. Just do the walking and I'll do the working. The battle is not yours, the battle is the Lord's. And when you read this in the Bible, it does not say the walls of Jericho came down, it said the wall of Jericho came down, meaning just one part of the wall came down. Now, the part of the wall that was still left up was Rahab's part of the wall, because that was the promise that they made to Rahab, that they would spare her life and spare the life of her family as long as she put the red scarlet cord out of her window. That section of the wall, because she lived on the wall, did not come down. Now, we know from Moses, he had the Passover. And in the Passover, they had to tick all these boxes. You have to have the unblemished lamb. You have to eat bitter herbs. You have to wear your clothes. You have to have your staff in your hand. You have to have your sandals on. You've got to be ready. And you've got to put the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel. Rahab was a prostitute. She didn't tick any of those boxes, but she had the red scarlet cord. Now, that red scarlet cord represents the blood. It represents the covenant. meaning that God was willing to spare the lives of the Israelites when they ticked all these boxes. But when Joshua came along, when rest and grace came along, God was willing to spare the life of a prostitute and her family, meaning that the blood covers it all. It doesn't matter if you tick all the boxes, it doesn't matter if you tick none of the boxes, the blood covers it all. What's also interesting about Rahab is when the spies came, she hid them under stalks of flax, meaning that on the roof, she hid them under all the wheat, under all the hay. She could only do this at one point of the year. She could only do this at harvest time, when she was drying the stalks of flax on there. And this is important because the harvest time was when they crossed the River Jordan. It was the hardest point of the year. But God was willing to make it hard for Joshua and the millions of Israelites to cross the River Jordan in order to save the lives of the two spies. God will go out his way to save you, even if it means inconveniencing everybody else. He's willing to do it for those two spies. He's willing to do it for you today. So, in summary, number one, prepare your dried food. Have those verses ingrained on the inside of your heart. So when those tough times come, you know that because you are a person of wisdom, because you had the foresight to see it will not always be easy, you are prepared for the battles ahead. Right, number two, to live a comfortable life, to live a life of comfort, you have to be living a life of discipline as well as a life of guidance. You have to be sheep and understand that God is the shepherd. A life of faith is not a life of logic. And to do this, we need to have roots that go deep as well as roots that go wide, like the acacia trees. Number three, Joshua, I'm not for you, I'm not for your enemy. Like the battle is not yours, the battle is the Lord's. All you have to do is walk. And number four, if the blood can cover the Israelites for doing the right things, it can cover Rahab for doing all the wrong things. The blood covers it all. Like the point here is there is enough grace, there is enough favor for everything in your life, plus more, for all the mistakes you have made, all the mistakes that you will make. So yeah, that concludes everything. Thank you very much for listening.